I started working with your association a couple years ago, and it was actually kind of a project and a challenge for us. I've been doing HOA law since 1995. I was on the State Bar POA committee, which is a committee, the real estate section, that they thought actually knew this. I didn't at the time, but at least I learned something while I was on the committee. That having been said, when I was approached by a group of homeowners, your civic association, and said, we don't really have a formal association. We don't have a formal management company. We have some deed restrictions from either the 50s or the 60s to the extent they are. Can you help us? And, it was kind of a daunting task doing a lot of work with developers with deed restriction books that are that tall for everything down to how many fatinias you can have in your front yard. And it's real easy when you know exactly what everything should and shouldn't be. Now, the problem with that is, of course, if you got Sugar Land, if you go to a friend of yours' house, go to the neighbor's house, have a cold drink or two around the swimming pool, and then your buddy says, hey, why don't you go back to my house and get my car keys or whatever it is. I don't know if I could find the house again. They're all exactly alike, okay? That's not what we're looking at here, okay? We don't need to go there to talk about deed restrictions. But the big difference in deed restrictions and non-deed restrictions, and I hope y'all are reading the scan. We try and put something that at least kind of builds the story and gives you some information in every scan. And I hope y'all are reading that. But if not, I hope y'all been to the Heights versus the Woodland Heights. And you notice the difference between those two neighborhoods that touch each other in the exact same place, built at the exact same time on this just outside of downtown. Woodland Heights has deed restrictions. And their houses are cute, and their property values are about $30,000 to $40,000 for the exact same house in the Heights. Reason for that being is they don't have cars parking in the front lawn. They don't have auto repair shops out of houses. They don't have a lot of things because they can enforce deed restrictions. Y'all have deed restrictions. All of Sharpstown has deed restrictions. They're just very dated. For instance, when these documents were created, if you wanted to send a message, you either used a nice fountain pen and you drew ink out of a well, or you manually pushed buttons on a typewriter. Well, we know that since then we went to the IBM Selectric and the electric typewriter, and then we went to the mono box computer, and then we went to, all the way now you can just send an email, or actually you can email from your telephone, which is very Star Trek-like, which when we all watched Star Trek back in the 70s, we went, that's ridiculous. Well, of course, that phone was a few phones ago when they had the flip phone, if you remember. We're past the flip phone, we're past Star Trek. Well, of course, back in the 50s, you had a 45. We all remember 45s. They were nice. But then we went to 8-track tapes, and then we went to cassettes, and then we went to Blu-ray lasers, and then we went to Betamax, and then we went to VHS, and now, of course, and then we went to the internet and HBO. When we got cable, it was HBO. There was nothing else on it. But then there are all these other channels. Well, now, of course, you can watch a movie on your phone. The laws, the legislature, and quite frankly, neighborhoods have changed in the last 50 to 70 years as well. And that's kind of the concept that the board brought to me was, we want to do something that brings us current with the law, or at least gives us the ability to be mobile enough to modify the documents if the legislature says that we need to modify something. That's number one. Number two is we have, and actually they started giving me stuff to do. We have questionably brothels or houses with too many people that don't have anything to do with one another, but or we have houses that haven't had the siding put back on in years, and now the underlayment is rotting off. Or we're getting a bright blue house with trash all over the place. Or we have fences made out of sides of signs and or containers, etc. Well, we went through on those original documents for a while, and I know, and I apologize, nobody's going to be able to see it, but we had, houses that had, just the siding on them, or siding coming off, and they brought to us and stayed this way for years. Or we ended up filing lawsuits on behalf of your association based on the deed restrictions you have and getting judgments against these people. Judgments that have injunction. The court ordered them to clean up the house, repair the siding, paint the house, put the roof back on it, put a new fence on, and, by the way, paid these people their attorney's fees. People paid us their attorney's fees, and if I'm smart enough to know how to do this, since I wasn't planning on holding a microphone, the house was sold, remodeled, repainted. All the trash is gone. The fence was rebuilt, and it's now nice. I have a lot of examples of this, but this is awkward as all get out. We had houses with too many cars. We had, essentially, what we did is we came up with a list of what are the 4 or 5 things that are repetitive in your neighborhood and that we can do something about. And we started talking about those. How can we make it more specific? Because ultimately, deed restrictions, if they're going to be effective, they should be objective, not subjective. Okay? That, to me, is a huge piece, and it should be for all of y'all. You don't want some new board coming in and deciding what they think is the right thing. You want them to be objective. You want to be able to look at them and say, oh, if I want to build an addition on my house, I have to turn a form in, period. If I have trash in my yard and it stays out there, they send me a letter and I don't clean it up, that's going to be a problem versus documents that said neat and sanitary, okay? So what we did was we started talking about those problems, and hopefully y'all got here early enough to see some of the survey results. If you didn't, the survey results, I think they're up on the Facebook or however y'all communicate. Online, they will be. Okay. And I think that's a great piece of information because it basically confirmed what we were experiencing as a law firm and your board was experiencing based on homeowner calls and complaints about houses in the neighborhood, which is there are some key issues that this neighborhood needs to address. People taking their houses and doing whatever they want without any control valve. Bright pink houses, purple houses, metal houses, you name it. Or fences not being repaired with actual fence boards. I don't know. It's a detail that I thought was relatively self-explanatory, but some people like old signs and door containers or part of a panel van. I've seen a lot over, and y'all have shown me a few new things in Sharpstown. So it is creative, yes. You have a lot of people that like to park in the grass versus on the, I guess they're testing out the 4-wheel drive of their El Camino. I'm not real sure, but it's really, that's one of the main complaints. Too many people living in a house that aren't related or leasing out of bedrooms or short-term rentals, okay? The survey miraculously came back fairly close to those having those as your high points. Now, y'all have seen me at previous meetings with a big old giant book. That big old giant book has all your sections in it, but when I go to a subdivision out in the suburbs, I have a big old giant book like that is for one subdivision with one set of deed restrictions, okay? There are many associations and most new associations with a giant set of just draconian mandates, for lack of a better way of saying it. This board said that's not where we want to go. That's not what we're trying to do in this deed restriction amendment. What we're trying to do is, A, let's bring them up to what the current state of the law is, because it's the law whether it's in your documents or not. So no harm, no foul there. It already applies to everyone. Might as well put it down in writing so everybody knows what that law is. Again, subjective, getting everyone involved. The more you know, the more you're going to be a good neighbor. Number 2 is to get rid of some of the draconian language, or let's just call it quaint, socially inadequate language. Y'all have some inadequate social language in there about quarters and things of that nature, and it just needs to go. We're past that as human beings. I hope everybody in here is. There's some still in this country that aren't, but we won't go there. That's a political conversation I'm not supposed to have ever in an HOA meeting. Anyway, that was my transition. That having been said, we went through, and Sean McKee, my partner, who's been with me for 10 years before as an associate, before I made him a partner, recently board certified HOA lawyer, so he's got all the right bells and whistles. I'm too old to try that board certification stuff. We just got it passed last year, so that it could be a specialization, but the two of us sat down and brainstormed. Based on what we have seen, the type of cases that have come out of your neighborhood, what do we think would be a good set of minimally invasive deed restrictions that give us the ability to deal with, and let's start at the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that just is going to annoy almost everyone. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, there are people that live in every neighborhood I've ever represented that hate their deed restrictions, and hate the board, and hate me, okay? So I'm hated in a lot of places, but, and it's not just at my house. So anyway, what we did is we put together what we thought was a good set for your board to look at, and taking your documents and amending them as minimally as possible, but to address those high points. Having done that, we had then gave that to the board, who came to my office, and we walked through them. They all talked amongst themselves, but they also did something I didn't know about, which is they went out to y'all, and I'm glad they did, with the survey. They said, let's make sure that we're all on the same page. And based on the survey results and the conversation with the board, we went and further refined that document. Took some more stuff out, added a few things in, and clarified a few things. Now, no one is ever going to be completely happy with a set of deed restrictions, but that's what we're talking about right now. It's not a big, giant, draconian monster document, okay? By any stretch of the imagination. And hopefully that's going to be put up on the board relatively shortly so that y'all can look at it. Or may already have. I don't know that answer, but okay, it already is. Okay. So your current deed restrictions say that they can be amended by a majority of homeowners. In particular, we're looking at Section 5. Okay, that was another thing. Right now, what we talked about was we want to harmonize the documents. Okay, right now there are many different sets of deed restrictions with a little bit different language. And so the ultimate goal is to have a set of documents that we can adopt by section. And that's the way your documents are drafted, that each section has to improve their amendment. So, for some reason, the board came up with Section 5. I don't know. If you live in Section 5, lucky you. If you don't, hang on and support Section 5. And essentially, Section 5 documents allow for the documents to be amended by majority vote. So, it's a majority vote in writing. So we've laid out a plan to the board. First of all, let's get a document we're relatively comfortable with. All right? Once we are comfortable with that document, let's set up an informative meeting so we can talk to the homeowners, get their input on it, and have them actually listen to the concept and see what kind of support we have in the community. That's where we are tonight. That's where this meeting is, to get input, at least to introduce the concept. They're going to be, if you haven't looked at them online, this is not the only opportunity you are going to have by any stretch of the imagination. But this is the introduction, okay? So what did we go and do with these documents? First and foremost, the very first thing we did once we looked at Section 5 is we said we need to have a definition of single-family residence that is in two different places, in two different forms, okay? One of them deals with the type of structure, okay? And the Supreme Court of Texas, in a case called Tarr, recently said that single-family residence in your deed restrictions means the type of structure. Fabulous, okay? That, as opposed to a duplex or an apartment building or something of that nature. So we already have that. That's wonderful. That doesn't help us with really our real problem. Well, there's two other pieces to that problem. One is single family use. So we added single family use to these documents. Use means what are you going to do in the residence? We're going to bathe, we're going to sleep, we're going to cook food rather than have a lawn care business run out of the property so that we have 15 employee trucks parked in front of it, or we have all the trucks that park there overnight because the employees all go home, but this is where the business is run out of. Now, there are, of course, and I'm getting out of order, and I'll come back to commercial in a minute, but we did single family use. We also added in by single family use that it could not be used as a short-term living arrangement, okay? And there's two different ways that that's broken down. One is we don't want you to list your house on Airbnb, so new people are there every weekend that don't care a gnat about the neighbors and that are having a backyard barbecue every weekend, and they're gone, and Monday the new people come, and Tuesday different people, etc. The secondary piece, other than no short-term rentals, was no partial rental. We've added in that you can't lease out, all your bedrooms to different people. So we have 15 different people that aren't related living in one house. Okay? Again, small steps, but steps that make a difference in the feel of your community. This is your community. This is not, next to the Astrodome where there are 50 people living in short-term rentals and they're all changing out depending on who's at the game. And it feels much more like an apartment complex or a hotel than it does a community. We're a homeowner community. After that, we did go into the businesses, no businesses. Now, when we dealt with the no businesses, we dealt with it in a way that makes sense again, which is it's no businesses that are visible from the outside. So if you want to run an internet trading, or you want to trade stock inside your living room on your computer and nobody knows that you're running a business, great. Not trying to prevent that. What we're trying to prevent is 15 UPS trucks running up and down the roads and running over a kid. Or your employees coming and parking in front of the house and your neighbor's houses all day long. So it's actually the type of use of the structure, again, is if it's a residential use, i.e. nobody from the outside is understanding you're running a business. Now, we do have something about you can't run a business that even is inside your business if it's an illegal business. That was kind of, unfortunately, you have to add that. In this, people don't think, oh, well, nobody knows. It's got to be okay. No, it's not. We also added in a provision about commercial vehicles. And commercial vehicles, again, when you talk about commercial vehicles, it is a vehicle that is visibly commercial. Not that my company owns my car, okay? My law firm owns my car.
Like taco trucks?
Taco trucks would be one of those that is visibly not a commuter vehicle. But essentially, that's what we have right now written into the documents. Those are the major changes, other than one, which is, okay, if we're going to enforce this stuff and we're going to try and make sure that people with houses that are not kept up or are falling apart or they're painted the wrong color or there is, is the proper language, let's use English. If there are 3 or 4 taxis or wreckers parked in the driveway, how are we going to do anything about it? So far, we have been funding a attack of these things through volunteer donations. And quite frankly, there is a phenomenal amount of participation as volunteers, because obviously I hope that y'all see that it has made some difference on some of the worst houses in Sharpstown. And that's the only thing that this board turns over is the very worst, because they're not trying to be Sugarland. They're not trying to be Nazi, we want to harass everybody. They want to have people take care of their homes and to have a nice community where you can raise your children. So there is, in there, we did add a section about taking their assessments and having them to be mandatory assessments. Now, we talked long and hard about, in doing that, what would be a fair rate, what is something that we're comfortable with the bills that we're paying, and what they have come up with is keeping the assessment the same as it is for the voluntary at $250 a month, a year, excuse me. Sorry. All right, yeah. No, and to make sure that,
Now we know where it's going.
yeah, no. It's $250 a year, and to make sure that it doesn't turn into $250 a month, we added in there that is a maximum cap and can only be raised pursuant to an increase in the consumer price index. So it is capped. Well, I tell you, the last 10 years it hadn't been over 1.2%. The CPI is extremely low. Actually, I don't think it keeps up with reality in Houston, where we have had all of our housing be a little bit undervalued for decades, since the 80s, actually since 1983 when the bottom fell out of Houston. And we've been one of the cheapest places to live. So over the course of time, CPI has been falling behind the cost of living in Houston. But it is capped by CPI unless the homeowners vote on it. So it gives y'all the ability, if there is something that you want to raise it for, it requires a vote unless it's just purely inflationary consumer price index. That gives y'all the ability to, continue with your sheriff's patrol or SEAL patrol, I think. But continue that, maybe expand it. If you have some funds, and actually if more people are paying, you can pay for more. You do mosquito misting, etc. And I think that your board wants to have the ability to do more and provide more services. The way it is drafted is mandatory. Now it also has drafted in there that payment plans pretty much are mandatory too. We're not trying to say you have to, come up with it or we're chopping your leg off. That's not the way this board works at all. At least not in my experience. So, if there are people that need that's not only is it in the document, but it also is one of the things we had put into the property code. So, that's the mechanism of enforcement there. That's pretty much what I had planned on doing, other than answering questions. So I think the way we're going to do this is so that people on the camera can see us, is people that want to ask a question come to this microphone, and then so that everybody can hear the questions. Does that
Yeah,
work?
perfect.